Hey everyone, so I recently posted that video comparing SGC values to PSA values, and I got a huge response. And a lot of the response was people telling me that it wasn't very good because there were things that I didn't consider that I needed to consider. Fair enough. So what I did is I'm releasing this new video, which is going to take a deep dive into ultra vintage cards. We're going all the way back to the T206s through 1953. And we're gonna see, is there a good comparison for SGC values to PSA values? Now, here's the problem. There aren't a ton of cards that are graded in that era because there aren't a lot of them around. And if they are around, they could be a different back or a different color or a different type of card or a different grade or a 1.5 versus a 1 versus a 2. So I had to find some cards that were the same grade, the same exact card. And then what I did is I took a look at those cards side by side. Let's look at the picture of the card. So yeah, maybe one was miscut. Maybe one of them had a hole in the card. Let's compare the cards and what they sold for. So I go back in and take a really deep look at this for 12 cards from T206s all the way to 1953. I spent a lot of time on this one. I spent a lot of time putting together some quality data for you, so I hope you enjoy it. The only thing I ask in return is just subscribe to my channel. As long as you subscribe to my channel and you maybe like the video, that would be a way to show me, yes, you like this. Yes, this is something you want more of. And let me know in the comments, what do you want more information on? What do you want to analyze? What data is out there that we need to take a look at? So appreciate your support. Let's take a look. The ultra vintage comparison, SGC values to PSA. All right, so let's take a look at this data. Now, there are obviously going to be fewer comparisons because we are talking about some ancient cards, some 100-year-old cards, and to find them in the same grade, with the same variation, with the same background, with the same back. There's so many different variables, but let's take a look. So first off, we have a T206 Walter Johnson, the blue background, with the same back. Now, when we look at these two cards, first off, note the SGC sold for $960.05, the PSA for just $735. So when we look at these two, the SGC is the clear winner here by quite a bit. Now, when we compare the two cards, though, when we compare them, the centering on the PSA, I think it has pretty good eye appeal. Centering is better than the SGC one, but the corners definitely seem less rounded here. I mean, there's definitely a point to these corners down here that there is not to the PSA one. So this seems like it's clearly the better one, which I'm sure played a role in the price. So let's look at a T206 Ty Cobb. This is the portrait variety with the red background. Now in this one, kind of similar centering. This one has better color. The SGC 4 has better color, better surface. I think you could make the argument it might have better corners, and the centering is pretty similar. So to me, the SGC here is better, but the PSA sold for 21% higher. So when comparing these two cards, I lean SGC on the card, but the PSA sold for more. So far we have SGC 1-1 and PSA 1-1. And in both cases, I think the SGC is probably the better looking card. Let's take a look as we continue. All right, so next up is the 1933 Gaudi Lou Gehrig. So there were a couple of PSA 1s, just one SGC, so we have all three to look at. One of the PSAs sold for $35.50. That's this one right here. The other one, I mean, these corners are really rough. This one sold for $21.76. The SGC has a big crease across the center and doesn't have the same color. I mean, this is by far the best one, and it sold for by far the most money. So I would say here the PSA is the best one. Then the SGC is probably second because at least it has a kind of a corner. And then this PSA third, but the PSA sold for higher in the nicer one, and then a little bit higher in this one as well. Now, again, everybody's opinion is going to be a little bit different. Some people value centering over corners or color, and we're all different. But kind of interesting here that PSA, even though this one is really rough, still sold for more. Let's look at a 33 Gaudi Ruth, number 144. Quick interruption. I know what you're already thinking. Why is he only comparing a PSA 1 or a PSA 2 or a SGC 2 to a PSA 2? Why isn't he doing multiple different cards? Again, remember, there aren't a bunch of these out there. I don't have 4 PSA 5s to compare to 4 SGC 5s of a 33 Gaudi Lou Gehrig. There are only a few cards that have recent sales, and these are eBay sales, but recent sales of the same grade of some of these cards because they're ancient. There aren't a ton of them out there. So bear with me, understand that I'm not just cherry picking certain cards to try to make a point. I don't care if SGC is higher or PSA is higher. It doesn't matter to me. Personally, I think SGC looks better. SGC is faster. SGC is cheaper. I just assume SGC win if I were to pick one. But that's not what the point is. The point is to compare recent sales, same grade, similar cards, the cards side by side and the grades side by side. All right, back at it. So we have 2 authentics, so one of each an authentic. Now this one looks like maybe someone dropped it in the bathtub. It is still a Babe Ruth card though, and it sold for $27.50. And this one is authentic but clearly trimmed. And that one sold for just under $4,000. So better looking by far as the SGC. Price is quite a bit higher for the SGC as well. On the PSA 1 versus the SGC 1, kind of similar looking cards here. Similar corners. Very similar corners, actually. I don't know if I would really prefer one over the other, but the PSA sold for over $1,000 more. So again, in this one, PSA is higher in the 1, similar in look. The SGC sold for higher in the authentic, but the authentic PSA is pretty rough there. So the combined total is the SGC is higher, but this head-to-head comparison isn't really that close. Let's look at the 48 Bowman Yogi Berra. So in the 1s, we have 271, 318, 271, 318, and 255. So when I look at these 3, it looks like there might be a little tape or something on there on that one. Centering's pretty good on all 3. I think I might like the SGC one maybe the best here. The price, though, both PSAs went for more than the SGC. Could be, I don't know. The display here is nice. These people didn't really even put much thought into the display. So that's interesting that PSA 1, even though I think SGC might have the better card. In the 3, let's look at the 3 down here. This one's way off center. This one's better centering. These 2 are similar centering, but the corners and color and clarity might be a little bit better there. I think I might like the SGC To me, this is the third best one. Probably the SGC is the best one, but again, the SGC is the lowest price of the three, which is interesting. So when we look here in the three, the SGC was $479, but the PSA's averaged $526, so 10% higher for the PSA. In the four, there were two of each, so I didn't do a side-by-side comparison. If there were more than one, I didn't do the side-by-side comparisons because it gave us a better idea with the average, although one of the SGCs was 510 and one was 1,000. So one of the was the highest, one was the lowest, but these PSAs were a little tighter. So not really a difference there, but the PSA is slightly higher. So in all three for the Yogi Berra, the PSA is the highest. So let's keep moving along here. Now a 48 Stan Musial. There were three of each, so we were able to get a good average. One of the PSAs was quite a bit lower. It sold for $666. Not the best number, but when we look at comparing those, it looks like SGC had the two highest, and then I had one, just a picture of the card. This is a miscut one, but it's just a picture of the card so you can see what card we're talking about. No side-by-side comparison because there was more than one of them to compare, and we got a good average. But the SGC is clearly higher here. So interesting that SGC is doing fairly well at this point. Now let's go ahead and look at the next card, which is the 1948 Leaf Warren Spawn. So we have three SGCs in the one PSA in a one. So you've got, this one's got some massive rubber band marks, it looks like right here. It looks like somebody dripped some gravy from Thanksgiving on this one, and then way miscut here. And the PSA sold for by far the most other than this one. So not surprising PSA, pretty similar here as far as, the price should be a little bit higher because it was the best one. These two are clearly the worst. Unless you're a corner person and don't care about centering as much, then this one might be your favorite. I don't know. And then we'll go ahead and look at the three grades. So we have the 3 PSA versus the 3 SGC. Similar centering. Color seems better here, unless it's maybe just the picture itself. But it seems like it has better color. Similar cards, just slightly better color. That corner right down there is a little rough, but similar cards. But the PSA sold for significantly more. So let's go ahead and take a look. Again, PSA won both by a lot in that one. Okay, our next card is the 48 Leaf Joe DiMaggio, and in a one. So we've got the two ones here. This one has probably the best centering, side to side at least. Corners are probably the best on this one as well. These are rounded, but at least they're kind of evenly rounded. SGC sold for the most in this one. Not by a lot, by about 8%. So SGC is the winner. I would have thought this is probably the best one. I don't know. They're kind of comparable. Prices are similar. Probably a fair deal there. So we'll go ahead and look at the 1950 Bowman Roy Campanella in a 5. So this 5 sold for $157.51. Man, that seems cheap to me. And similar, this is probably the best centering. It definitely went for the most. Corners are pretty solid on all of them. I would say this is the best one, and it sold for the most. So SGC is higher here when you compare the averages. And that kind of makes sense, I think. These two are pretty similar cards, but this one does seem to be the best. Okay. And we got the 1950 Bowman Jackie Robinson. Seems like if you were selling a $4,000 card, you might get a better picture than this, but what do I know? It is nicely centered, pretty well centered. All of them, except for this one, top to bottom, are pretty well centered. But by far, PSA is the higher as far as the value or sale price. And though this Jackie had the best corners, centering top to bottom is pretty poor. So I guess that might make sense unless you're not really a centering person and you're more of a corner person. You might like this one the best. But again, PSA quite a bit higher. Trying to take some sips of water. This cold is killing me. All right, if we look here, we have the Ted Williams in a PSA 3. We compared because there's just one of each. In all cases, the PSA averaged higher. The higher the grade, the more it seemed to be extra valued. In these two, the centering is better. In the PSA, it's a little bit more valuable, but not by much. Just a little bit more. So again, when you actually look at the cards, sometimes you get a little bit more information, but sometimes the worst card doesn't necessarily affect the price. And then the last card is the 1953 Satchel Paige. Satchel Paige is quite an interesting person, but let's look at the prices themselves. 442 against 400. There's so many of a sample that it doesn't really matter that we don't have one to look at. But the PSA is clearly higher. The PSA is quite a bit higher, and all three are higher than the SGC and the 2. And looking at this SGC 2, that's why I put it on there, because there was just one SGC 2 and one SGC 3, so I thought we'd take a look at them. Looks pretty nice. Looks like that's a really nice looking 2 to me. That's a pretty nice looking 3 to me too. Corners are a little bit better on the 3, but it's not like they're bad cards. I mean, they're nice looking cards, but the PSAs are still valued pretty high. And then the 4s, again, the PSA is just a little bit higher, a little bit closer here. So interesting, to say the least. So let's look at a summary of everything. All right, so the overall summary. The Walter Johnson, the SGC was higher. It was higher for the Babe Ruth, higher for the 48 Musial, higher for the Joe DiMaggio Leaf and the Roy Campanella. You can see the percentages there. PSA, however, was higher in 7 of the 12 cards. Doesn't seem to be a pattern as the older versus newer cards making much difference. If you take the percentages they were higher by, it averages out to about just over 8% more for the PSAs over the SGCs. So to me, we could definitely take something out of this. Definitely in the older vintage stuff, it doesn't seem as if SGC versus PSA is all that different, 7 versus 5, and just 8% higher. But in a couple of the cards here, 43%, 53, 41, it does seem to matter a little bit more. So yeah, I think that PSA is still a little ahead value-wise in the ultra vintage, but not way ahead. Not way ahead like they are in some of the other stuff. So for investment purposes, now again, if we're not investing, I don't know how much it really cares, how much it really matters. You know, if we're just collecting, I mean, the look of the SGC case is superior in my opinion, but the value is still slightly tending to lean toward PSA. But it looks like the older we get, the less it seems to matter. Again, if this information is valuable to you at all, please take a second to like and subscribe. I do lots and lots of research. It takes quite a bit of time to tabulate all of my data. So if you enjoy it, if you like it, the only thing I ask is please subscribe to the channel.